Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm here to discuss the different statistical tests. Specifically, I will focus on z-test one sample and t-test one sample. So but before that, I'll be giving you introduction on the different statistical tests and how do we decide on the appropriate statistical test to use given a particular problem. So, ang first step natin is to decide ano ba yung appropriate statistical test for this problem. Okay, so when we decide on this one, we consider the following. First of all, the scales or levels of measurement. To recall, what are these? We have the nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Next, we determine if normally distributed yung data natin. So what will be our basis for this? Our basis will be our measure of skewness. And then the third one, depende sa objectives ng study natin. Okay, so this chart shows us the summary kung paano ba mag-decide. So first of all, we determine the level of or scale of measurement. Okay, so apat lang naman yon. So dito sa first, pag yung data natin is interval or ratio, ang gagamitin natin na statistical test will be parametric. So ang statistical test natin is classified into two. You have the parametric and you have the non-parametric methods. Okay, so let me highlight that. Okay, so meron tayong parametric and meron din tayong non-parametric. Okay? Okay, so ulitin ko lang, sa under parametric, gagamitin natin ito if your variable is either interval or ratio. Okay? Kung ang level or scales of measurement niya nag-fall under interval or ratio. Ano-ano ba itong mga data na to? These are the quantitative data, yung mga continuous and discrete numerical data. Okay. Pag yung data na naman natin is either nominal or ordinal, okay, these are qualitative data, ang i-apply natin dyan na statistical test will be non-parametric. Ito po. Okay, so that's the first condition. It is based on the level or scale of measurement. Okay? The next condition will be to look if your data is normally distributed. So, ngayon, since we're done with the numerical descriptive measures and we have already discussed skewness, sabi natin sa measure of skewness, pwede nating ma-identify kung normally distributed ang data or hindi. So dito sa measure of skewness, okay, this will be our basis in determining kung normally distributed ang data or hindi. Pag normally distributed po ang data, gagamit tayo ng parametric. Okay, so dalawang condition ang kailangan niyang isatisfy sa parametric, quantitative and at the same time normally distributed. Okay, so kung ang measure of skewness indicates that your data is not normally distributed, then we use non-parametric method. Ayan. Okay, so under non-parametric, ang variables natin are either nominal or ordinal and hindi normally distributed ang data. Okay, so ano-ano po yung mga parametric methods? You have the z-test, you have the t-test, and then you have the f-test. So may mga iba't ibang statistical test under that. So sa z-test, meron tayong one sample, one proportion, two proportions. Under t-test, we have t-test one sample, you have t-test two samples independent, t-test two samples independent, dependent. Sa F-test naman, of course, you have your one-factor ANOVA one-way, one-factor ANOVA two-way, and two-factor ANOVA. Okay, so under non-parametric naman, actually ito, mga counterpart lang ito ng parametric. So, sa non-parametric, we have the chi-square. These are just few of the examples. Chi-square, goodness of fit, test of independence, my man with me, Wilcoxon, Friedman, saka Cruz-Calwalis. Okay, so ang focus natin sa discussion natin will be on the z-test one sample and t-test one sample. Okay, so before I go to the next slide, so I've mentioned about measure of skewness as our basis for test of normality of determining if your data is normally distributed. So I have mentioned also here other tests to determine kung yung data ba natin is normally distributed or hindi. So meron tayo ditong Anderson, meron Kolmogorov, and then Shapiro. So you can use any of those measures to determine if your data is normally distributed or not. Okay, so another basis for determining or deciding kung ano yung appropriate statistical test is based on the objectives of the study. So dito muna tayo sa upper part wherein your data is nominal or ordinal. Okay, so if the objective of your study is to determine differences, ito po yung mga statistical test na gagamitin natin. Okay, so pipili tayo kung anong yung appropriate dyan. You have the z-test 1 proportion, 2 proportions, chi-square goodness of fit, or chi-square test of independence. Okay, if your objective naman is determining relationship or association, okay, so we either use naman this statistical test. Okay, ito po. Yan. So, pipili tayo dyan kung ano yung statistical test. And then, if we're talking about impact or effect, usually mga qualitative method na. Okay, qualitative method in analyzing your data. So, you have this, pwede kayong mag-FGD, triangulation, SWOT analysis, and we have also the content analysis. Okay, so sa lower part, wherein your data is interval na or quantitative, if you are determining differences, okay, of two groups of data, okay, ito po yung appropriate statistical natin. Okay, two groups of data. Okay? Pag three or more groups of data naman ang i-compare natin or we determine the differences, ito naman yung gagamitin natin. Diyan tayo pipili. Okay? So, next is if we're talking about difference, relationship or association of two groups of data, okay, these are our choices, either Pearson correlation or point by serial. And if we're talking of three or more groups of data, we use multiple correlation. Okay? And then if the objective of our study is to determine impact, okay, or effect. So we use, for two groups of data, we use simple linear regression. Pag marami na pong data, we use multiple regression. Ayan. So these are the basis of deciding, one of the basis of deciding the appropriate statistical test to be used. Okay, so these are the summary of the different parametric methods. So meron tayo actually 9 parametric methods. Under z-test, we have this first 5 z-test, z-test 1 sample, z-test 1 proportion, z-test 2 proportion. So we'll start with the first two. Okay, so z-test 1 sample and t-test 1 sample. So ito po yung magiging focus ng discussion natin. Okay, so which I will be discussing later. And then we also have z-test 1 proportion, z-test 2 proportions. Okay, and then under t-test, t-test independent, t-test dependent. So nandito po sa right side kung kailan natin siya ginagamit. And of course, you have the 1-factor ANOVA, 2-factor ANOVA. Okay, so these are the different parametric methods. Okay, so now we go to t-test 1 sample and z-test 1 sample. Okay, so we have the z-test 1 sample and t-test 1 sample. Okay, so these are both used in determining difference between population mean and sample mean. Okay? So for example, ng population mean, kunwari meron kang standard value or standard mean, hypothetical, kunwari, result ng board exam nitong particular university. Okay? For example, the result of a particular board exam, sabihin natin ang average is 85. Okay? This is your population mean. Suppose dun sa school na yon, merong group of students na binigyan ng review kasi in preparation for for the next board exam. Okay, so for this particular group, nagkaroon sila ng mock board exam. Okay, MOCK, mock board exam. And then, kunwari, ang naging result is 90. Okay, so that will be your sample mean. So if you want to compare, may significant difference ba yun nakuhang average score ng mock exam dun sa board exam last year, sa result ng board exam last year nung school na yon. Okay, so if you want to determine difference nung 85 saka 90, population mean versus the sample mean, you either use z-test 1 sample or t-test 1 sample.